I'm Carol Ann, and I am a lifetime lover of the paranormal. And today, I have some more camping and hiking stories for you that might make you think twice before you pitch that tent too far off the trail. In 2019, Neil was going through a really rough time and was having a really hard time being around people. So he decided to pack up all of his things and go live by himself at the age of 30 out in the woods. Now, he was scouting an area in Delaware County in the suburbs of Philadelphia looking for the perfect camping spot. And after testing out some different areas and having some bad experiences, like his tent flooding after some heavy rains, he found what he thought was the perfect camping spot. It was secluded away from everybody and everything and surrounded by a nice large creek. And it was surrounded by all kinds of large trees. So it looked perfect. He decided this is where he's going to set up camp. Now, the tent that he had was a one-person tent, so it was just big enough for him to sleep in. But that's pretty much all he needed, so he was pretty much set. All he had left to do was to set up a barrier with some branches to keep other people out and to hide his tent. So after putting up this huge wall of branches in the area and setting up some tripwires around his camp, he just started living his life. And he was there for many days before the incident that changed his life. Now, Neil says, just to put things into perspective, it would be really difficult for anyone to find this campsite at the top of this hill. It was really remote. And in fact, even his brother, who would meet him occasionally just to drop off supplies, didn't know where the actual campsite was. So on one beautiful summer night, after it had just rained really heavy, Neil is laying outside of his tent, kind of leaning up against the hill. And the whole area is covered in a dense fog. It just looked like everything was covered in this huge cloud. And he had taken a long walk earlier, so he was pretty tired. So he crawled into his tent probably about 10 o'clock. So he crawls into his tent where he has all of his equipment there, so it's kind of cramped inside, and he zips it up. And he just settles in, starts relaxing. He's reading a good book, and he notices it's getting kind of late. So he puts out his flashlight, puts on his headlamp, and just chilled. And periodically, he would text with his sister just to let her know that he was okay, and chat about things and find out what was going on in her world. So pretty soon it rolls around to about 1 a.m. And he gets hit with this really strange feeling. You know, that feeling that something is just wrong. And he tried to shrug it off, but it wouldn't go away. So he laid there with his headlamp on, fully illuminating the inside of the tent. And the tent only has a little screened-in area at the top of one side. So other than that, you can't really see what's going on outside of the tent. So he starts reading again, and suddenly he hears something start running toward his tent on the left side and stop right outside the tent and start barking at him like a loud dog who's just about to attack. And Neil starts to just shudder and shake with fear, thinking that there's no way that a dog could get all the way up this hill and past the wood barriers and all of the trip lines. At least not without an extreme struggle and making a lot of noise. So in complete fear and panic, after hearing this barking and growling, he fumbles to get his phone. And in a panic, he starts texting his sister, saying there's something outside my tent and it's pretty pissed off. And she says, well, maybe it's a dog. But Neil tells his sister there's no way the dog could get up this hill. So whatever this thing is stops harassing him and disappears after about 10 minutes. But he was super freaked. So he got his phone and he dialed 911 and just held on to it in case that thing came back. And after an hour passes and nothing happens, Neil begins to relax a little bit, kicks off his shoes, cracks a beer, and starts reading again. So as time starts to pass, there's still no sign of the creature, but he is just way too horrified to even look outside of his tent. And it starts to roll around to about 3 a.m. and the ground is still covered in fog and he still has his phone in his hand. Then, in a sudden moment, he's completely paralyzed by fear. A state of fear so intense that he thinks he's gonna die. Then, something grabbed him. And whatever grabbed him started picking him up and smashing him back down on the ground. This thing was so strong, Neil says he felt like he was a rag doll. It just kept squeezing and shaking him as if he were nothing. And he looked at the phone in his hand and he tried desperately to move his thumb to the dial button so he could dial 911, but it was impossible. And this thing was breathing so loud and making noises so sinister that Neil says he had the impression that whatever it is came straight out of hell. The cries from it were almost like a loud pulsing sound, similar to like a heartbeat out of control. And whatever it is, beat the living hell out of Neil. And after fighting for somewhere between like 5 and 10 minutes and being completely paralyzed, it just stopped. And the state of fear he was in was so intense at that moment. But he took his thumb and he hit the dial button on his cell phone to dial 911. And he got a girl dispatcher on the line. But he thought to himself, what am I going to say? I'm in the middle of nowhere and I was attacked by something. No one is going to take this seriously. So he hung up the phone and started texting his sister saying, hey, this is the location that I'm in and I was just attacked by something. And he got no answer, so he just kept texting. But still, no answer. So he just cowered in his tent for the next few hours until the sun came up. And he was so worn out from that beatdown that when he crawled out, he was in extreme pain. But after a complete search of the area for footprints or some sign that something had been there, Neil comes up completely empty. No branches were moved, no lines were tripped, and the tent wasn't damaged. Which didn't make any sense to Neil because he was damaged. He could barely walk. Eventually, Neil moved his campsite and got a bigger tent and still doesn't know what it was that attacked him. Nor does he know what was barking outside of his tent. But he is scared to this day, knowing that there are things out there that are so powerful, they can literally paralyze you just by coming close to you. And apparently beat the hell out of you through your tent without leaving any sign of having been there. Was it a Dogman? Neil doesn't know, but he says it could have killed him very easily if it had wanted to. It could have made him a missing person in a heartbeat. So this story isn't exactly camping, but it's hiking. And it happened over a 2 or 3 month span in southern Illinois. Jason, his girlfriend, his sister, and 2 other friends of theirs that were dating decided to go out on a hike. It was night, which Jason says seemed like a good idea at the time. But the trail was short and it was within walking distance of their friend's house. So they follow this short trail out to a secluded pond, which almost nobody knows about. And they're just lying there on the edge of the pond, kind of enjoying the view, when he and the other guy both started to feel kind of uneasy, kind of like they were being watched. And they both have pretty good instincts when it comes to something like that and knowing when to get out. But the 3 girls just said they were being paranoid. Then it got cold. Fast. It was January, but the night that they went out, it was like 60 degrees. But it dropped to about 40 degrees in like 10 minutes. And there was this weird feeling in the air that Jason says was almost tangible. Everyone started to feel cold both inside and out. And they all agreed that there was kind of this vibe in the air of like intense hatred. At this point, the girls freaked out. So they all got up and hightailed it back to the house. And as soon as they got back to the house, the temperature returned to normal. Fast forward about a month. It's a full moon and it's a perfect time for a night hike. The other couple couldn't go, so it was just Jason and his girlfriend this time. They're sitting on the edge of the pond again, and his girlfriend's got her head laying on Jason's shoulder, when all of a sudden, Jason feels this sense of dread emanating from right behind him. Like this presence that he can't see, but he can't turn around to look. So at this point, he's feeling pretty scared. He looks down at his girlfriend and sees that his girlfriend is making this face that she makes when she's scared. So he's about to ask her if she feels it too. But just as he's about to say something to her, he hears a woman's voice in his ear. And what she says, Jason says, is incredibly difficult to explain. The woman said something he could completely understand, but he can't say out loud because it is the darkest, most horrible parts of him, spoken in a language he knows isn't of this world. And he's staring at his girlfriend, knowing that she didn't say it because it came on the opposite side of where his girlfriend's head was. And Jason starts shaking with fear and tells his girlfriend, remember everything you think and feel at this moment right now. His girlfriend asks why. He says, don't worry about it. We'll discuss it when we get back to the house. And after a few minutes, he feels like the presence is gone and they start walking back to the house. And even as they're walking back to the house, they feel like they're being watched and they can hear branches cracking and odd noises in the woods all around them. So when they get back to the house, Jason asks his girlfriend how she felt at that moment that he said, remember how you feel. And she said she felt so sad and cold and alone, like she wanted to die. And she also felt like they were being watched. Jason totally agreed with her, but he was super glad that evidently she hadn't heard the woman talk like he had. So Jason tries to convince himself that they were just being paranoid, but he and his girlfriend agree never to go back to that spot. Fast forward another month, and Jason's got the day off, and he has nothing to do until his girlfriend gets out of class. Now, by this point, he had tried to convince himself that they were just being paranoid about the things that happened at the pond and that they really didn't happen. They couldn't happen. But he couldn't quite convince himself. So being the curious guy that he is, and maybe a glutton for punishment, he decides to go check it out one more time. It's the middle of the day. He's just going to try it one more time and see what happens. So he goes out there and sits in a different spot for a while, and nothing happens. So he gets up and he starts walking closer to where they were sitting the last time he was there. And as he gets closer to that spot, he can hear something following him in the trees, but he can't see it. So he sits down and he starts scanning the trees on the opposite bank of the pond. When he gets that feeling again, the temperature drops by about 20 degrees and he is filled with a cold terror. He's kind of looking down, just paralyzed with fear. So he slowly looks up just a little bit and he can see, reflecting in the pond, a woman dressed in black rags about 6 feet away from him. But no woman. And as soon as he sees that reflection, he hears a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods behind him. So he whips around, sees nothing, and when he looks back at the pond, the woman is gone. And he knew he needed to get out. But that meant having to run through those horrible woods. So he takes off running, and he hears breathing and footsteps and cackling behind him, and it's coming up on him. And just when it feels like it's about to overtake him, he stops, whips out his knife, turns around, and there's nothing there. Nothing but cold malice in the air. And she speaks to him again. Different words this time, but the same unearthly language. Jason jumped in his car, sped off, and says he will never go back to that place again. David and his cousin are both members of the Yurok tribe, and both of them earn a living falling timber. About 8 years ago, they got a job out by Maple Creek, California, pretty far out in the sticks. It was a 17,000-acre ranch, And their contract was for 900,000 board feet of timber. So it was going to take them about a month and a half to get the job done. Now, David's cousin had brought his camper, but David decided to tent it instead and set up his tent about 40 feet away from the camper. Now, his cousin would work for a couple of days, go home for a day, work for a couple of days, go home for a day. But David decided to just stay there for the duration. Now, one night, after he'd made himself some dinner, washed up, all that kind of good stuff, he's laying down in his tent reading. And he dozed off for a little bit and he woke up again. Doesn't know what time it was, but he knows it was late because it was all dark outside. And he could just barely make out shadows of trees and things on the tent. And he realizes he's got to go to the bathroom. So he gets up, unzips his tent, walks about 3 feet away, and starts taking care of business. And as he's taking care of business, he's kind of scanning around, making sure nothing's out there. And he sees over by his cousin's camper, behind the propane tanks, he sees 2 massive shoulders and a head with no neck, but with eyes that glowed greenish. Now, when David sees this, he freaks out just a little bit. He has heard stories of things in the woods, but he doesn't know how friendly this thing is going to be. So he just turns around, climbs back in his tent, and lays down petrified. When all of a sudden, he starts hearing small rocks or small sticks or something hitting the sides of his tent. He is super freaked out, has no idea what's going to happen. So he is just shaking and is petrified. When right then, he hears the small creek that he and his cousin had set up camp next to starts getting louder and louder, almost to the point of sounding like a giant waterfall, which he knows is not there. Then a gentle voice came into his head, saying, "Don't worry, everything is fine. He's not going to be harmed. They're just passing through. Everything will calm down in just a minute." And just then, he heard the loud crack of a limb being cracked off of a tree. But the voice just said, "Don't worry, it's fine. Go back to sleep." And he did. So in David's opinion, this was a family of whatever they were, with a younger one just kind of messing with him, throwing stuff at his tent just because he was curious. And it was the parents or whoever the other family members were that sent messages to him telepathically to let him know that they were just passing through, that it's okay. And that they created the loud, rushing creek noise so that they could pass through without being heard. And of course, David's cousin didn't believe a word he said. Now, if you have some spooky stories you would like to share, go ahead and email us at inbetweentales@gmail.com. But first, click right here to watch some more true scary camping and hiking stories. And we will see you again soon on the In-Between.